All right, so just to start off, for everyone, my name is Nils Olsson. I'm the Chief Product and Strategy Officer at Tacton. Tacton, we're an organization providing software as a service for the manufacturing industry to help gain a competitive edge in a disruptive world. So I will be, as I just mentioned, touch on how we can affect the business outcome for real, how companies can secure resilient operations and stay on top of cost and price. Now, the first thing that I'd like to start with is actually to take a step back and look at the manufacturing industry. We don't often think about it, but the manufacturing industry it's really the foundation of the modern world. It's what basically drives our evolution. Over the centuries, we have constantly tried to get a better way of life, better quality of life. And, if you think about it, in developing countries today, the most common tool is actually a smartphone. And that's made possible by global supply chains, global manufacturing, companies working together across the world. So manufacturing is really a key pillar of our society and also of our future. At the same time, we do see, of course, and this is a picture which is probably engraved in many people's minds, the evergreen blocking the Suez Canal and the huge impact that it had on the supply chain globally. I mean, it didn't just affect ships that were providing goods through the Suez Canal. All of a sudden, it started impacting other routes and other supply chains as well. So what it really highlights is that although we're dependent on the global setup of how the world works today in many different ways, it is also a vulnerability. Now, there is, of course, issue with not just the supply chain, but also, the fact that we've come out of the worst pandemic in a century. And of course, recent events that have been going on in Ukraine and the ensuing, let's call it, issues in terms of supply chain that has caused. So what we're seeing is really a ripple effect of many different things contributing to what is quite a tough challenge. However, amidst, I should say, this global unrest, there is also a very strong public opinion. And that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Just because we do have issues with supply chains, we have issues with unrest and war in some parts of the world. We shouldn't forget about things like the climate crisis that we're currently in. And all of these things kind of contribute into what becomes hugely important for, in essence, every organization out there, which is a very clear link between high purpose in terms of how you operate, how you drive the organization, what values you have, and the success that you have in the market. Companies that embrace change attract better employees, perform better in the market. It's just facts. This is, well studied. However, to have clarity in purpose, you also need to have clarity in operations. So the big question, of course, is how can we build resilience and growth beyond the disruption? How can we thrive in a world that is posing us all of these challenges? Well, I'd like to focus a little bit on one aspect of this. We've heard previous speakers talk a lot about, for instance, how you can move closer to your end customer, how we can make sure that we have transparency in terms of the buying process. What I would also like to highlight is not all goods are bought directly online. If we look at companies that Tacton works with, and there's quite a few of them, this is just a few of all the organizations that we're working with, we can see that these companies, they have something in common. They tend to sell not, small items that you can sort of pay with your credit card. They sell big solutions. They sell capital equipment that can be configured in a multitude of ways, actually in more ways than we can imagine. together with services that will enable the equipment to perform in the right way, and all to reach an outcome that is valuable for the customer. So with all of these companies, the one thing we see in common is that they have very high product variance. So one product isn't just one thing that you order, from some place and sell on in the value chain. It's a ton of different suppliers, very often a ton of redundant suppliers, because you need to be able to choose the low risk and low cost routes in the value chain from an upstream perspective, but also from a downstream perspective. It comes with a ton of different requirements. So every single customer, in essence, that you sell to will have a slightly different outcome in mind. So it requires a ton of agility to be able to juggle all of those different aspects. So if we look at the type of equipment that you will find in these types of companies, this is just an example. What you're looking at now is probably something that most of us haven't seen in our lives. This is a baking machine. So the loaves of bread that you buy down in the supermarket, they of course come from somewhere. And bakeries of today is not like somebody's, making a dough and putting it in the oven. There are entire production lines behind that. Now, when you sell a piece of equipment like this, or the full production line in the bakery, you see that the complexity of the products gives you an amount of issues to deal with, which is borderlining infinite. Just to take an example here, if you have a product with 500 configurable parts, that actually gives us a total of 10 power to 150 potential solutions. It's a huge amount of different things that you could be offering to the customer. Now, of course, there's only going to be one solution out of all the solutions that you have available that is going to be the most suitable one for your customer. But there's also going to be one solution that is most suitable for you from a supply chain perspective. So the real problem that we're seeing in complex manufacturing is that we have three, in essence, areas in the organization. We have sales that are trying to satisfy the needs of your customers. There's engineering that are trying to make sure that you have the best products available with the best specifications and possibilities in terms of outcome, and at the same time staying compliant with the different requirements that we see in the market. And then, of course, you have the supply chain side of the organization, who are constantly trying to make sure that you take the lowest risk and lowest cost route to be able to fulfill the needs of the customers that sales are engaging with. This basically means that these diverse customer needs require solutions with a high degree of flexibility. And that in turn makes it hard to both sell and deliver them with good profitability. So if I look at the kind of core things that needs to be under control, it is really about in the full supply chain. And this goes for pretty much any company in the supply chain, but of course it is extremely important for companies that are selling highly complex capital equipment, such as the baking machine that I showed you before. The first one is to have the availability and cost under control. Now, with the kind of issues we've seen in supply chain, the evergreen disaster in the Suez Canal that I showed before as well, that puts a lot of issues in terms of control in place. So how can you make sure that the items that you're configuring in your product, in the solution that you want to sell to the customer, is available or has a very low risk of not being available at the time you need to deliver it to your customer? And at the same time, you need to stay on top of cost. So if we're looking at individual parts, for instance, let's say you can take an easy example with screws, right? So if you're using screws in your assembly setup, you're basically screwing things together. You could quite easily say that, okay, we're going to have a couple of different types of screws. Then we're going to probably want to have a couple of different suppliers for those screws. And on that level, it's really easy to keep track of inventory, keep track of what are the prices from the various suppliers, and what's the availability in terms of lead time. Now, what that means, though, is if you're putting this on a highly configurable machine, all of a sudden, it's not just one item that you need to keep track of. It's the combination of all the items. So you're going to have one configuration of equipment that's going to have an overall lower potential of issues with the supply chain. At the same time, of course, you need to stay on top of the lead time and quality in your internal processes, making sure that you can build the thing that you're looking to build and that it has the right settings, that has the right features and capabilities that your customer is looking for. And then downstream, of course, your customers are ultimately looking for the outcome of what they will get from you, what your solution will enable them to achieve. But of course, also the price. And the price and the cost tend to have a very strong correlation. So the challenge here is not just to be able to configure these complex solutions. The real challenge is to make sure that you're optimizing the solution that you're offering to the customer for the whole good of your organization. That you're, of course, winning the deal with the customer at a price which is, sitting with good margin, but also that you avoid risk in being able to fulfill that order from the customer. So at Tacton, we often talk about something called trusted configuration. And it's not just trusted, it's also connected. So if we look at the three areas again, sales, engineering, and supply chain, traditionally we're sitting with a number of tools in these areas that support us in our daily lives, support us working throughout the workflows and the processes in the organization. We have CRM in sales, we have PLM and CAD in engineering, and we have ERP, supplier relationship management, and so forth in the supply chain side of the organization. The traditional way of working with this is that engineering develops something, basically sends it over to supply chain in terms of a product introduction. You now understand how you're going to build this, what suppliers you're going to use, and so forth. And you launch it to the market together with sales and marketing, making sure that the awareness is ramped up so you can start supplying the new equipment. And eventually, of course, then taking quotes and understanding the availability, or sending out quotes and understanding the availability of those products that you're selling. The issue with this is that, as you can tell, all of these different areas in the organization, they're sitting with their separate tools. They're kind of siloed. In the CRM, we don't talk about engineering bill of materials. We don't talk about lead time and stock levels in the minute details of the parts that go into equipment. And in engineering, we very rarely talk about price levels. We very rarely look at the stock levels as well, for that matter. And in supply chain, it's all about making sure that you can build equipment, but not so much focus on the actual outcome for the customer, because that's something that you're promising in sales. So what we at Tacton do is we introduce the capability of being able to connect these three areas. We do it with a tool called Tacton CPQ. It's in essence a tool that allows us to both configure the equipment from a sales point of view, as well as make sure that it's correct from a technical point of view. But the really cool thing is that we can also stay on top of the availability of the parts. So Tacton CPQ, just for those of you who don't know what a CPQ is, it stands for Configure Price Quote. It's in essence what lets you choose the right product from your portfolio and make sure that you have it priced in a way that will give you good margins and low risk in sales. So what this allows these organizations that we work with to do is to all of a sudden take down the time it takes to understand what solutions you should be providing your customers with, from often weeks or even months down to just minutes. And we secure that it's, one, correct from an outcome point of view for the customer, two, that it's technically valid, that it can be built and that it does what you're promising to your customer, but three, that you actually have a low risk in terms of your order fulfillment in supply chain. So by having, for instance, lead times, by having stock levels, by having cost updated instantly, you now don't have to have people sending information back and forth. It simply just updates the system with the correct data and avoids picking things that are unavailable avoids picking things that have low margins, and of course focuses on making sure that you create great customer value. So the outcome of this is really what we call end-to-end agility and predictability. Agility, of course, being able to quickly change what is being sold depending on the situation and as it changes. Predictability, making sure that when you're putting a quote out there, you know exactly what equipment you have offered. You know exactly down to the last detail what you're actually sitting with in terms of delivery. So it gives us much better possibilities of looking ahead. It gives us much better possibilities to act quickly. And ultimately, what this leads to are some really great results in the organization. So the results we see from transparency in operations are kind of three key things. The first one is on the revenue side. By being able to be more agile in sales, quicker to respond to customer needs with better and more accurate quotes, we see growth in both sales volume and even in deal margin, because we're right-sizing the products from the very beginning. Oversizing is a classic issue in the manufacturing industry. So right-sizing the products, being super fast to respond to customer needs, that basically has a really positive impact on the sales. Efficiency, of course, there's a decreased cost of sales and supporting functions. We no longer have to have all of the different product experts and supply chain managers involved in understanding how and what we can sell. So by automating that, we're freeing up these resources very often to do much more value-adding tasks. Product experts, for instance, or engineers, typically didn't go through engineering school to sit with quotes and verify different types of statements. They would much rather focus on building and innovating new things. And then the last one is quality. So once you get an automated structure in place of how you create these quotes with the right technically valid pieces of equipment in them, you decrease order errors, which leads to less rework internally. But even more importantly, it also leads to less issues with your customers because you're able to fulfill their requirements better and better over time. So we actually see decreases in things like warranty costs, penalty fees, and claims from customers amongst the companies we work with. So I can see that I've been roughly at it now for 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask Carlos to perhaps switch back to our common view, and perhaps you have some questions for me.
Perfect. Actually, I have there were no questions from the audience, but maybe I can ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So in terms of, so thank you for this. I think it's really nice and super interesting because there's a lot of complexities in the world of B2B, right?
Sure.
So what do you see in terms of, because we talked about B2B commerce here, is this something that you're seeing that the customers are also moving towards? How do you see that? That's my first question.
Yeah, there are very clear trends in the industry in a number of different ways. Of course, customer experience, being closer to your customer, is as true in B2B manufacturing as it is anywhere else. Naturally, with the type of products that I was talking about here before, you can kind of see this is not what you kind of go onto Amazon and buy. I mean, one of these baking production lines probably has a total cost of, let's say, 5 million euro. And on top of that, there's a huge projecting sort of work that goes into it. It has to fit within a certain factory and so forth. However, if you can make the products available to your customers, and with the type of tools that we're providing, make it easy for them to understand what they could actually get from you, you're actually cutting a huge amount of time from the sales cycle and also increasing the odds of the customer choosing you. I think there was a study some time back, a couple of years back, that said that more than half of the customers have decided what suppliers they will choose before they contact the salesperson of the potential suppliers.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like, as let's call myself as a marketer. I believe that if the website is good and enables you to converse, you want a salesperson there to actually be a consultant, because a lot of the research will be done beforehand, right? And so if you're able to offer a good experience, and I think there was a research from Intershop with another company from Sweden talking about one of the trends in terms of B2B commerce is exactly what you're offering, CPQ technology, and because you can actually help customers configure a lot of their features, and right?
Exactly. You can immerse your customer in your product portfolio at an extremely early stage, even before you have your first interaction with them between people.
Yeah. One of the things also that got my attention about your technology is that you're able not only to configure price, but also colors and other things, right? Like when you're on the site of the, let's say, Tetra Pak or whatever it is, you can actually play a lot with the technology, almost like a first layer of an e-commerce, right?
Absolutely.
Like a front end.
Exactly. No, so there's a lot of the companies we work with, they actually have the possibility for people to not just go and configure the products and see, what can I have and so forth, but actually do complete visualization. It's something that we support with Tacton CPQ. So you can have a full 3D, even artificial reality model. So you can, for instance, configure a truck and then hold up an iPad and see the truck in your garage or on the side of the road. It is just such an amazingly more immersive way of getting your customers to understand what you can do for them.